Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on our marvelous planet. My name is Craig Walker, subject matter expert for CATIA V5 with Tata Technologies. I won't tell you how long I've been with this product, but suffice it to say that my first installation of CATIA was back in IBM mainframe days. So that might give some of you some idea of how long I've supported this product. Marvelous product. CATIA, for those that may not know, is the acronym stands for Computer Aided Three-Dimensional Interactive Application from Dassault Systems. We're going to tiptoe through the tulips for looking at some of the tools options settings that you may or may not be aware of, depending on your experience level. This is really oriented primarily to new users, but I'm sure that even experienced users may pick up some things from this session. First of all, I may cancel out of tools options here, and we on the what I refer to as the alphanumeric menu up top here, I have tools, drop down to options, and these are the options that are available to you as the end user, with a caveat. I'll explain that in a minute, that allow you to determine how your user interface works for you. Now, two caveats. Number one, there are organizations that rewrite your settings. Tools options are put into what's called settings files. They rewrite that entire folder upon initialization, upon each initialization of CATIA. So therefore, you may change some of these settings and have that session have those settings in effect, but suddenly the next time you initialize CATIA, they're all gone. Number two, this icon right here, or these icons in the tools options, and then the entry field or the clicks over here to set the settings. In between those two right here, you may see one of three colored padlocks, two of them open, one of them closed. The open padlocks are green, which means have at it. You can do anything you want with this setting. The other open padlock is orange, meaning that your CATIA administrator has made a change to the default setting for that. And finally, a closed padlock image, which is red, which means that your CATIA administrator has changed something and or locked that so you cannot change it. Now, if you have made some changes to your settings and things are a little screwy, never fear. Right down here, this icon on the very bottom, if I park my cursor on it, resets parameter values to the default ones. The orange padlock that I referred to means that your CATIA administrator has changed the default for that particular setting. So that's what that orange means versus the green. Now, you can then, when you get things a little hosed up and your CATIA session's a little wonky, you can actually use this tool to do a setting of a reset, of the settings on that particular tab page in a selected solution or for all tab pages. Be careful with the all tab pages because that's going to change everything on every page back to its default settings. And again, if there's an orange padlock on any of them, those settings have been, the default for that setting has been changed by your administrator. Over on the left-hand pane, we have the general highlights of the workbenches that are available to you based on the license that you have selected or the license that you've been given. In general, let's walk through these very quickly. Now, I'm just going to introduce you to them. There are a number that may be of interest to you. First of all, under General and under the General tab. So the General section in Tools Options under the General tab, automatic backup every X minutes. That will automatically back up the data that you're working on in session And if you have a failure of your session, lose power, whatever the case may be, when you come back up, it's going to say, hey, do you want to use the warm start data? Meaning that you will get back to within 30 minutes of the data or the operations that you were performing on that particular CAD part, CAD product, CAD drawing, whatever the case may be. Next one down here, automatic disconnection after X minutes. It is always recommended by every organization that I've ever worked with that when you get up from your desk, lock your system so that somebody cannot go in and make modifications without your knowledge. If you fail to do that, or the other scenario that I use is the fire alarm goes off and you're going to run out. If you have this automatic disconnection set to a particular number of minutes, then it will automatically disconnect your session. In other words, it will deactivate the ability to use CATIA. Under help, it is strongly recommended, and I'm not going to go into the settings here, it is strongly recommended that you have the help documentation. Help documentation can be facilitated with the F1 key, and then there are other ways that we'll see here in a minute that you can facilitate it. If you do not have it, if you hit the F1 key and you get no response, then I would strongly recommend that you make a request for the help documentation. The reason for that is you can be in the middle of any command and you can hit F1 and it'll go into the help documentation for that particular command. So if you just don't remember what this particular field actually means, it'll bring up the help documentation for it and you can see what it is. In addition to that, I've got a question mark tool up on the top of this title bar for tools options. If I select it, I get a question mark, and then I can go to just about anything and in tools options and select that and say, all right, what does this mean? And it'll give me a longer longer description of what it is. I'm going to skip over shareable products for a moment. If you select the licensing tab, it will show you the license that you are currently using. That license is, there's a check on that license every 17 minutes by default. So if you are going to exit CATIA, I strongly recommend that you go to Start Exit rather than hitting the X click up here on the top. The Start Exit immediately releases your license so somebody else can use it right away. The X click on the upper right may hold on to that license for 17 minutes. Just a little heads up. Now, this is what's called a configuration license. It is a bunch of workbenches that are within that configuration, and that's what's assigned to you. This is hybrid design. My particular one is Hybrid Design 2 with KnowledgeWare Expert add-on to it. In addition to that, you may or may not have shareable products. If you click on that field, what you may or may not see in the resulting display are the products that are available to you to use on an impromptu basis. So I may want to use one of these products, DMU Engineering Analysis, Advanced, whatever the case may be, and those allow you to use that workbench for the time that you're not releasing the product. In other words, while you're in the workbench, and then when you are finished using that workbench, you can come back to this Tools Options General Shareable Products and unclick it so somebody else can use it. Now, you may or may not have those shareable products, but you will have some kind of a licensing type mechanism. Now, CATIA seems to have its own mind in terms of sizing of dialog boxes for the most part, and therefore, since even though I have a lot of space to do much better sizing of it, I don't have any options for sizing it. So watch out for the scroll bar at the bottom. And if you left mouse click on that scroll bar, you can drag across to see what all the options are. And if you see that there's a broken image of a tab, these clicks right here, the two left and right pointing arrows, will get you through those. So if I click on the right one, it'll go over to the next tab setting. and so forth. I can also pick on a particular tab setting and it will take me over there. Display. I'm going to go through just a few settings here that may be of interest to you. Stay away from tree type. This vertical type is the most efficient to use, but you can have it so that it's horizontal and all kinds of good things. I would stay away from that and let that tree type remain as it is. Tree manipulation. Tree zoom after clicking on any branch. I don't know if you've discovered this or not, but if you're over here and trying to use or trying to open up one of the sections of the tree, and suddenly everything gets grayed out. Let me do that for you. Everything gets grayed out and you don't have the ability to work with your actual document. Okay, this gets grayed out. The compass gets grayed out. Its colors go away. And when you do for example, a zoom function, you're actually zooming the tree. Okay, well, that's nice. But if your tree is perfectly readable and you don't want to worry about that, and you don't want to have to come back over here and click on the branch again to unselect that, then you have in Tools Options the ability to turn that function off. Now that's up to you again. So let me come back to Tools Options. Tree zoom after clicking on any branch. A lot of people turn that off because it's very annoying to come over here and try to hit the plus sign and inadvertently you hit one of the branches and now your zoom functions, all of your cursor functions are working on the tree rather than on your geometry. Hang on one second. Okay, performance, very significant one. Number one, occlusion culling enabled. What the devil does that mean? Occlusion means I can't see it. Culling means I'm not going to update that information. Now, if you're working on an entire fighter aircraft, for example, you may want to turn occlusion culling on to increase the performance of your session. Every time you manipulate with this turned off, it will recalculate everything about that model, even including the things that you can't see. So if you're looking at a complete vehicle, a complete car, for example, it's going to recalculate repositioning of the engine that's under the hood that you can't even see, under the hood, behind the fender, et cetera. You can't see it, but it's going to recalculate it. If you turn this option on, it will only calculate the graphical representation that you can actually see. Next, 3D and 2D accuracy, they're very similar. One is proportional. Nobody uses that. It is based on the sizing of the object. If you're working on a fighter aircraft or something even larger, a warehouse structure, whatever the case may be, then you can do a proportional 3D accuracy. In other words, how accurate is the representation that's being graphically presented to you, and it will change based on the size of the object. Now, everybody really uses fixed. In terms of fixed, I have a 0.2 as the default for 3D and 0.02 as the default for 2D. I'm not going to go into what that exactly means, but it is a representation of what the chord length is if you are going to change, as you're manipulating your geometry, how for example, the most dramatic one is how is a curve represented. So let me kick up the 3D just so you can see the effect of it. There is a representation on the right that shows you what's happening to the chordal representation. Now that's pretty dramatic. So in this case, with this value, I don't really get the actual curve that has been defined. I get chords of straight lines that represent that. So if I say okay to this, suddenly my graphic representation becomes very anomalous. So come back to that And what I recommend is one of two options. Number one, leave it where it is if the default of 0.2 is okay with you. But I always, and I'm always working in terms of teaching or presenting or whatever the case may be, I always set to the lowest value, which is 0.1. These values range from 0.1 to 0.01, I'm sorry, from 0.01 to a value of 10. And now when I represent it with a 0.01, I get a very smooth representation. So even if I zoom in on this, it's going to be very smooth. And then the same thing applies for your 2D accuracy. So it's how it's being presented. There are other options that you can look into with the help documentation that affect how your data is presented as you're moving it versus having it static, etc. I'm not going to go into those today. We're trying to do just the ones that are of significance to a new user. So visualization, number one, I hate this graduated background. Also, I don't know if any of you are experiencing this. If you're presenting like digitally over the internet, this gradation could show as bands of color. And that just is a distracting thing. I don't know if any of you are experiencing that, but if I click that off, say okay, now I have a solid background, which is something that I like much better than the graduated one. You have the ability right here to change the colors of what's being represented. Selected elements are orange, selected edges are red. Pre-selection highlighting meaning as you go across your object, it's going to show it to you. By the way, if you have a dialog box open, you may or may not have the ability to use selections over here. I would leave these as they are for the time being. Actually, I would strongly recommend that you leave them as they are, period. So that somebody, you're out sick today and Joe has to give a demonstration to a customer or something, and suddenly you don't have the ability to understand what you're looking at because the guy on this particular workstation had changed things. So I would leave those alone, quite frankly. Okay, and, oops, sorry. And the other last one is the representation of line thickness for particular objects when they're presented graphically. I'm not going to go into what these all mean, but you can come here and change the thickness and the representation of how linear elements are represented graphically. Parameters and measures over on the left-hand side. The thing that you primarily want to work with here are two things, in my opinion. If you're going to have parameters in the tree, and they're turned off by default, I would say set with value and with formula. So in the specification tree, you can see what that parameter's value is or how that parameter is being used. So just click these two on, and then the parameters that are being represented in the tree, you see what its value is. And if you don't do this, you're going to see the parameter potentially, but you're not going to see what its value is. So I would strongly recommend that you make those changes also. Infrastructure. Infrastructure are things that cross many different workbenches, is the way that you can perceive that verbiage being used here. And product structure is referring to assemblies, and part infrastructure is referring to parts. So let's go to product structure first. Cache management. This is the ability to save your data ongoing so that you can recover. I'm going to leave it up to you to talk to your IT and or CATIA administrator as to whether this should be turned on or not. But this is where the data that is being collected to do the warm start is located, or has settings for it. And then product structure. Hang on a second. And then tree customization. By default, You see materials, you don't see parameters, you don't see relations. Think of relations as the formula that we just talked about. So you see the material, you see constraints, you see any applications that have been created in your specification tree, but you don't see parameters and relations. If you just simply click on this and make a change, you can change this to a yes function, and therefore you will see those in the specification tree. Strongly recommended. So that, in conjunction with the other option to show the value and the formulae, that will give you more information in the specification tree to look at. I'm going to go down to part infrastructure. Under part infrastructure, there are some things for external references. You will be visiting this at some point probably. Keep link with selected object if you're in an assembly and referring to between parts for references, for external references in that part. This would be of interest. Under display, again, I have the ability to display in part design constraints, parameters, and relations, but they are turned off by default. So a good idea is to come here, look at what the settings are, and make a change to them. Now, let me re-emphasize that you may not be able to make these changes in your organization, or your changes may suddenly disappear when you are reinitializing CATIA. And then this is things when creating a part, create an axis system, create a geometrical set, etc. So these are some settings. Enable hybrid design. None of my customers use hybrid design. Hybrid design means that the wireframe and surface elements can be put right in the part body, and it's just a confusing way to organize your data. So if you have the option to turn on hybrid design, make sure, and you feel you want to use it, make sure that it is not against company standards, because a lot of organizations forbid the use of hybrid design for the very reason that it makes understanding your particular documents a little bit more difficult. Okay, under part design, I simply have some options here that I can select for insertion of a part body, if a surface tool, etc. So nothing really of significance here. Under assembly design, if I can select it correctly, I have automatic update or not. So I can turn on automatic updates so that when I make a change, it automatically updates in an assembly context. If I make a change to a part and I want to see what that part looks like, I can do an update automatically. We have the update tool right down here on all the workbenches represented here, but I can do it automatic. So, and everybody turns that on, for example. And let me go across here. And Sketcher, what you want the grid to look like. You can have a grid that has spacing that are different. Right now, if you change horizontal, vertical will change with it. That's the norm. Nobody ever changes that. So do you want that grid displayed in Sketcher? That is distracting to some people, so they turn it off, etc. And then do you want to do particular things in the sketch plane? Do you want to shade the sketch plane so when you're manipulating the actual sketch itself in Sketcher, then you can see where the plane is more appropriately. If somebody turns off display the grid pattern, and then they will normally turn on shade the sketch plane so you can see where that plane is being represented. Under drafting, there are a bunch of settings. Some of the most significant ones, once again, do you want to display the grid? Do you want to snap to point? And by the way, I missed it. Snap to point is also a selectable option in Sketcher. Do I want to show a ruler so you can actually get a sense of the sizing that you're working with in that? And then under shape, generative shape design, I'm working with an MD2 license primarily. So I have a limited number of options here. If you have a higher version of the configuration with more workbenches, you're going to see more entries here. There's nothing really of significance here at the new user level. There is the ability within generative shape design to work on a support, a planar reference, etc. So that's the only thing that might be of significance to you as a new user. And then you can determine whether how you're going to have the sizing of the grid pattern on that support. Okay, let me review the things that you might find when you get back to your desk. You might find that you have padlocks, green, orange, and red. Green, have at it. You can change anything you want. Orange, your CATIA administrator has changed the default for that setting. And red, you can't change it, period. You may also have nothing there if your administrator hasn't done what I would refer to as the administrative overlay on everybody's tools options. The administrator has the ability to have a set of settings that change the defaults that everybody sees. So that could be blank if your administrator hasn't gotten to that point in determining how he or she can control your environment. And then lastly, and this is the most confusing one, you make all these nice changes, you test everything out, it's perfect, your settings are just like you like them, and tomorrow morning you start up CATIA and everything's back to defaults again. So that would be, and there are a number of organizations that do this. They want complete control of your CATIA session, and therefore it'll wipe out your settings files every time you initialize and put the ones they want to be enforced there in place of those. Thank you very much for attending. If you'd like to ask questions or refer back to any of this information, you can use the email address igetitsocial@tatatechnologies.com. Everybody have a fabulous day, and everybody be safe. Thank you for your attention.